What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Swingman podcast. It's podcast number 109. As ever, I'm your host, Jawson Ledger, joined as I am all the time by Louis Halpin and Lewis Howard. The World Cup's on, so it's not really the NBA fever that's currently going around right now. But, we want to talk some NBA. It's been a little while. Are you boys well?
Yeah, not bad. Much better than you've been lately.
Yes, I have. I have had the Rona, the COVID. This video is it's not getting monetized anyway, but it would have been demonetized now. And a few other little chest infections after that, which are all fun and games. But let's go. Let's just jump straight into it. So when we prepare for these podcasts, we have some little chats beforehand about what things we want to talk about and this, that, and the other. And one of the things that Howard was really champing at the bit for was that he wanted to talk about the Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves, they've got my favourite player, Rudy Gobert. And I think you wanted to just talk about, how bad it has been for the Timberwolves, which, I will gladly sit back and listen to.
Yeah, I've also just seen the little anecdote at the bottom, which is a nice touch. Yeah, it's mainly because I think that was one of the real question marks going into the season, talking about that Rudy Gobert trade and how Minnesota would transition to using the two bigs. And I watched a little video about it the other day by an account called Thinking Basketball on YouTube. It's a really good YouTube account. Anyone that likes basketball should go give it a look. And they went really into depths about how it's been looking, what are the issues, and whether there's a future for it, really. And much of the thing they talk about is the fact that the idea is you bring Rudy in, you raise the floor of the defense of that team. Meanwhile, the offense that they already had through Anthony Edwards and through Cat would carry you through. And what's been happening so far is the defense, because last year they actually were a decent defensive unit, but with Rudy Gobert, you'd expect that to jump. But they've actually remained about the same, while the offense has dipped quite a bit. And going into it in more detail in that video as well, what they talk about the most is just the way that the teams, when the center's guarding, so when Rudy's guarding or when Cat's guarding, how they've had to change that up with this change of going with the two bigs, because whenever Rudy's in the pick and roll, he tends to, we all know he tends to drop, and that means that you got to have your guards got to be really aggressive, fighting through those screens and sticking with their man. Whereas Cat is more, he tends to hedge more, and then there's a lot of rotations after that. And that's all well and good. And even when it's just Rudy and someone else involved in that pick and roll, there's a few problems they need to sort out, but that'll come with them playing more and learning the systems. But the issue's been arising when Cat and Rudy are playing in the pick and roll together, because Cat can't stick with the guy on ball whilst Rudy's dropping, and so there's just so much space there for the person to then get off a good shot or create a play. And also, they also highlight in the video the loss of someone like Jared Vanderbilt not being on that team anymore, because he was one of the guys that could make those defensive rotations and close down those people when they did come up with some defensive issues, and they don't have that at the moment. So I think a large part of it is growing pains and having to learn the new systems with having Rudy there. But there's definitely a problem when Cat and Rudy are both involved on the court in that pick and roll, and that's something that's going to be far more difficult for them to sort out.
It was a strange trade in any case. I mean, any team looking and trading for Rudy Gobert, I would put as a strange trade anyway. But for what they did, it's tongue in cheek in regard for it. But for what they had with Edwards and with Towns to then go and pick up to go and pick up what they had with Towns and Edwards, then go and pick up Rudy Gobert, it was scratching heads. It was for me.
It was a weird move. I agree. I think it was more the level of like the volume of assets they gave up in return for it was always because I put a special affinity for the Timberwolves.
Yeah. I would say the consensus on the actual, trade value is that I think everyone thought they overpaid massively, but in terms of now it's there and how they're going to work, that's definitely a problem that they're going to have to come up with some sort of solution for, because as I say, the actual integrating him in the team other than just involving them two. I do think as the games go on, they'll get better and better in that aspect, but they're going to have to come up with some sort of solution when both of them on the floor and both of them are involved.
Yeah, I mean, well, Cat's out now. He seemed to pick up an injury a couple of games ago, which could be serious. I think they sort of referenced it was like a groin strain.
It's a right calf strain that they gave him.
Yeah, it looks worse.
It looks a hell of a lot worse than a right calf strain.
Yeah.
They've said 6 weeks, but it gives proper. It's been said all over Twitter from it, but it gives proper KD vibes of when he done his calf strain and then he done his Achilles straight after. Even though they're not linked, everything really is linked in those sort of things for it. But
I mean, it'll be interesting.
Him back soon.
Nah, it'd be interesting to see how just Edwards and Gobert work together a little bit, like you said, because Cat. I always thought that was a concern, is Cat defending on the perimeter a little bit, and I'm not sure who that they can plug in there that may be a little bit better. But I also think you talk about the defense. I think they've lost something on offense as well in terms of, when Cat's at the 5, it really stretches out the other team's big and it leaves those lanes open for Anthony Edwards, basically. And you saw him struggle in certain games this season, and last night, they played the Memphis Grizzlies and they won. I mean, we're pretty down. They're like, they're 500 at the minute, 11-11. So they're pretty on par for the rest of the Western Conference, if we're being honest. There's only 1 or 2 teams in the Western Conference that are far above the rest. You're talking your Suns, and you're talking your Nuggets, really, and maybe the Pelicans can kind of be in that bracket, but not too far. They're like 2 or 3 wins above the Timberwolves. So it's not like they've been absolutely horrific. You would expect some growing pains, but all in all, I just don't think I'm a fan of the trade because, I mean, you just watch Anthony Edwards last night in that fourth quarter, and you can tell this guy's he's going to be a superstar. And it just didn't seem like a right type of way to build around him, really. Like you said, it kind of limits his offensive game a little bit, having Rudy there in the paint, kind of clogging up those lanes. Not Rudy, but the guy who's guarding Rudy as well. And I just felt that it required like a slow build around him. Give Cat that contract, that's fine, and he can be with him for a couple of years. But at the end of the day, the keys have got to go to Edwards at the end of the day because he's got the mentality for it, which Towns has never really had. I don't really like using that criticism because it's kind of how can we measure mentality? But you can tell Edwards has got something different to him that Towns doesn't, and he's just he's more a modern offensive defensive player, and he makes terrible decisions sometimes because he's a young player and he's learning the game. And I think that's another thing. The Timberwolves are just make really odd decisions on both ends of the floor. They should have beaten the Grizzlies in the playoffs last year, and they'll retain that. I think they should have gone through in that series. So it's like I don't know why they needed to make that big move, and that's what concerned me in the amount they gave up. I've never really disliked Rudy that much, but you know his limitations. You do. So
it's more weird from the fact he's 30 like Rudy Gobert. Like I don't understand the trade for the fact of if you're making a trade of that size, you want to win now. Rudy Gobert isn't a player that you get to win now. He's not proven at all.
Depends on what team you are. Depends what team you are.
Yeah,
I don't even. What team would you throw Rudy Gobert in to win now? I don't think there is one out of all 30 that are in the league. I can't see it.
It's essentially the question is what team needs a defensive anchor that's going to propel them.
But he comes with negative connotations that come with it.
Yeah, so it's obviously
that, but you lose off. The trade-off is never worth it for me.
You weigh up what you're going to lose versus what you're going to gain from it. I think the bigger issue, I think it's even less looking at the positive negative side of it, and more just does it translate to the playoffs? And
what you have to give up as well. For a player of his caliber, because all NBA defensive player 4 or 5 times, whatever. In a weird way, and I know he's not a better player. Part of me is I'd kind of prefer to have someone like Miles Turner, who's a really good defensive player as well, but can do a little bit more offensively, and he can sort of switch a little bit as well.
Hell of a lot more offensively.
And you wouldn't need to give up as much for him, basically. So, it seemed to me at the time, because they have new ownership in Minnesota, and it seemed to me like, your big swing, new owners will do this. It wasn't the right move, definitely, but, they're like a middling team in the West, and we're not saying they're terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not what they gave up, that you'd want them to compete for a title, and they're not going to do that.
Yeah. The main reason I bring it up is just because I thought it was a There's an interesting thing to see how they're going to plan on maybe changing how they defend, because the offensive struggle, you can't really do much with the offensive struggle. The answer is Rudy gets more effective. I'm going to do that in a year, obviously. So I look at the defensive side, and I think how are they going to change? So is Rudy going to Cat's defending on ball? Because realistically, Cat's not going to be able to fight through screens and have the agility to be able to let Rudy play the way he wants to in that pick and roll, and how much all the switching they're going to have to do and going out to different defenders, and it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting one to watch over the year, see if there's any improvements.
I will say D'Lo has been terrible as well. That's another point on both ends of the floor. When you look at their offense, he's been bad, and defensively, he's never been great. So that's another thing to consider. But yeah, interesting. I think it's a good sort of talking point because there's good and bad parts to him. It's not like we'll go on to the Wembanyama race later on where there are some truly
they're not a part. Yeah, they're not a part of that yet.
Oh no, yeah, they're not there, which they shouldn't be if you're trading like 6 first round picks for a player. But yeah. If you're even in the conversation, it's a bit of a concern.
No, completely. Anyway, okay. I think Lewis needs to quickly run and do something, so we'll transition away.
I've just realised, isn't it?
From the Minnesota Timberwolves. Actually, just before we do, I still can't get my head round if they're building with Anthony Edwards, I still wouldn't even put Rudy Gobert as a partner for Anthony Edwards, as like someone that I'm gonna think, I want him as the guy. Like even if you got, I don't know, there's a lot of things to me.
Nah, it's not really natural. You want a space in big, basically, don't you? Which is what Towns is probably the best space in big, but he's not good defensively, and they wanted to get that team better defensively. So first thing that comes into your head, we'll get the best. Widely considered one of the best defensive players in the league, but I think it just needed a bit more of a careful, slow build. And you'll give them credit for at least trying. We can talk about the Mavs maybe a little bit, but I feel like they've just never put anyone around, or even really tried to put anyone around Luka Doncic that is on his level. Really good enough to push that team higher up. So.
No, I mean, we can transition this. We can go to all quite on the Western Front in any way, and we can definitely go through it. But I mean, the Mavs are the issues that are with the Mavs are sort of they're not the same in terms of years gone by with Luka. It's always been get Luka help and everything like that, which does make me laugh when you look at how well that Jalen Brunson and Kristaps Porzingis have been playing this year. But regardless of that, the issue that is with the Mavs is. I think they're almost becoming so one-dimensional based off Luka that the other players that are in and around him, if they're just not in that sort of half a performance and they're not really relatively involved that much, they get so cold that there's no one else. His usage rate is so high, which is a compliment of how good Luka is, but you're never, ever going to win a chip playing that way.
No, you're not going to. I mean, we've seen it before, really. You just have to look a couple of years ago at what James Harden was doing in Houston, and it is kind of him and James are kind of similar players. If you look at their sort of types of skill sets, obviously there's things they're better at than each other. But the usage rate, the poor players, and they're just standing around waiting for him to pick out a pass, which he can do. He can pick out a pass and get him an open shot. But I agree, we have never seen anyone with built like that, where a team has one player who's doing absolutely everything for them on the offensive end. Win a championship. The closest really is Allen Iverson got to the finals with a really poor Philadelphia 76ers team. And I mean, maybe you could say maybe that's unfair because, Houston did push Golden State quite close. And that was obviously probably one of the best teams of all time in that Golden State Warriors team. So, it could work, but I mean, just look at the standings. I think they're 11-11 at this moment in time. Something of that type. 10-10. There you go. So you got them.
The thing is, the West is hard. The West is normally hard, but the West is very hard this year. I think there's the only I know OKC are not meant to be in this race at all, but SGA has just forced them into it.
Oh yeah, it's been so good.
The Spurs and the Rockets are just completely irrelevant here.
The Rockets don't even get me started.
No, I know the Spurs and the Rockets are irrelevant. But apart from that, there is genuine cases that you can make for every other team to make the playing tournament quite easily.
Yeah. I mean, you got the Kings in there as well this year, which is usually a team you'll just throw out casually because they're never good. But they
Kings fans can put their chest out right now.
Exactly.
They're looking all right. You can't mock the Kings this year.
No, of course not. I know they've got a good. I mean, De'Aaron Fox has been really good. Sabonis, I think.
Harrison
who was
Barnes.
it the other day? I think it might have been KD's talking about how challenging they were to face up against. Which if he's saying that, then he knows basketball as well, and he likes talking about it.
Is that not a throwaway comment though on KD when he was like, "Have you seen my team? How am I expected to win? I'm playing against the Kings." Like
we've missed. I feel like we've missed the boat on the real Nets drama.
One of the things.
What was you going to say, Howard?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is I think that what KD was saying about the Kings, it says a lot about the Kings, but I also think it says a lot about the Nets in that. He was talking about Sabonis is really difficult to play against because it's very hard to switch anyone against him. And while that is true, I think that's true of quite a few teams. But I think it's made more evident on the Nets because they've got absolutely no inside presence. So they just can't switch it because he's going to take advantage of anyone, as will any bigger guy against them.
Yeah.
I mean, just as the general comment, the West is looking quite. Yeah. Why did you want to call it all quiet on the Western front again?
I don't know. I just like the pun. It really doesn't make sense because the West is pretty exciting at this moment. It's more exciting, I'd say, than the East because
if they're all good, then in theory they're all quiet as well.
It's true. Yeah, they're all cancelling each other out. It's like
I'll tell you where it is all quiet. It's all quiet over in the Clippers with Kawhi and Paul George. That's where it's quiet.
That is concerning.
The thing, but is it though? Normally, I would be all on this, but Paul George and Kawhi can sort of they can kick their feet up because the bench mob are absolutely doing it for them. They're doing the bits, so they don't need to rush back and play these games. But this is the trap that the Clippers have fallen into, of which all of the bench mob get a rhythm going, and they all get this team chemistry that are playing, and then they throw back in two superstars, and then it's sort of the ball goes out of these guys' hands and it just messes things up a bit, and the rhythm and everything isn't there.
I would say we saw that a couple of years ago with the Clippers, or a few years ago now even, where they did the exact same thing, and that absolutely did not work when they tried to throw it back in. So I think it is a cause for concern there. I think it's mostly a cause for concern for my over-under because I had them over 52.5 because I thought Paul George and Kawhi play some games. And that doesn't look like they're playing that many, so I don't think they're going to get to that anymore.
Kawhi is a real, like, what's going on there at this stage? Is this guy,
I'm coupling them together. I will say I shouldn't really couple Paul George with Kawhi because Kawhi is just on another level when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I saw a thing of the tweet when they did the confirmation that he'd re-signed, and since then he's played I think it was 14 games or something like that. Like it's truly been pitiful with the amount of time he's played.
It's a real shame because you look at his sort of trajectory where he was going when he first got that injury when he was in San Antonio, where Zaza Pachulia obviously stepped under him, and that kind of started. I don't think he's ever been great in terms of playing for a full season, but that really started like a tailspin because I think the next season, obviously, there was a whole thing. The Spurs went to Toronto, obviously, on a championship. You just think if this guy was injury-free, how many is he putting up, really? I feel like they could have won the year that the Bucks did, really. I think they would have beaten the Suns in the Western Conference Finals with a fully healthy team. However that guy, he beat Giannis before, he probably could have done it again. So it's a shame. But at this stage, I'm not putting any sort of stocks in the Clippers, to be honest, because I agree. I think they're going to get to the stage where they just have not played together at all, and they can't figure out a way to play together when it matters most. But we'll see how it develops. Basically, I hope he gets to play more games.
Do you ever think you'll see Kawhi Leonard play a 60-game season again?
No, absolutely not.
No.
No. Even I can't see him being like a sixth man. I can't see him being one of these guys that floats about a bit.
After he's got a
career.
ring, I can't see that. If he didn't have that ring from Toronto, I can maybe see it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the ring.
He's not that.
I had a ring before, but like, it's more.
You're prospecting a lot.
It's more of that, like, I don't know. I think that after the Toronto thing for him, it was sort of not done on his NBA. Like, I think he'd love to go and do it and win it for the Clippers, but after all the injuries and stuff, I can't see it now.
I can't. It's just weird for me to think of him in that capacity. To be honest, he doesn't seem like that. I mean, he has been a sixth man before for the Spurs. I guess he could go back into those, but it's just like
different stage.
It's hard to, it's really hard for me to imagine. You usually got to be the veteran, charismatic leader of because his leadership is all by how well he plays. Basically, he's just a quiet guy, isn't he? We all know how he is. So he can just pick, come off and get points. He'll score. He can defend, I guess.
I think six man talk and floating around the league is a bit too far at the moment.
No, I'm talking about later, obviously, like later in his career. But if he ever gets to sort of grace the court really consistently again, is another entire.
It's like the road he might go down, I guess, is what you mean.
Yeah,
it's just I know I've said it in the way of which you add them back in and then you take the team chemistry away. But if you see how good these players are that are meant to be sort of the bench players for the Clippers, if they were having a Kawhi Leonard, a Paul George with them, the Clippers is just they would be frighteningly good. Is the sad thing about it, realistically.
And you would say that the West, like quite nice in front, it's
wide
open. It's wide open.
It's just
at the start of the season, I think everyone, maybe not completely agreed, but that they have on paper one of the best rosters in the West and in the league in general.
Yeah, no, they do.
Completely.
But I was going to say on this, but I mean to end this topic more than anything, I feel like any of these teams within this sort of like Western bracket could be open for like a big hitter trade, and I feel like Miles Turner, Buddy Hield, they've all been related to the Lakers. That's kind of where the big buzz is going. But yeah, I could see, the Pelicans could benefit with someone like Miles Turner as well, protecting the rim, getting their defense up a bit, and he can also do some spacing on offense as well. That's a trade I quite like the idea of. So it's anyone's game in the West. I'd like to just see who can really grab it. And it looks like the Suns are I'm kind of repping them today as well. They're kind of leading them out at the minute, but I think there's part of us all that are a bit like
we're all waiting for that one thing to happen at the Suns, and then it will start tanking down.
Well, Chris Paul's been out basically the whole season.
Chris Paul injury has been going on for ages as well, like way longer than it should have been.
Yeah.
Because it always gets brought up for any so rare stuff that Chris Paul is out, or he starts a questionable and then he's out again, and he's meant to be back the next game, and he's not. So something's up there, but
Booker has been unbelievable. I will say that, and I think Ayton was Western Conference Player of the Week this week, which is nice for him. Obviously, a bit of a turbulent off season, but nice to see him come back. So I think maybe we were guilty of seeing how horrifically they crashed out last season and kind of thinking that's it for them. I mean, I there are teams I prefer. I think the Nuggets, if I had to come down to it, I feel like would go further in the playoffs, but they're in there, and the Warriors as well. They're not looking great. Well, they haven't looked great in the last couple of weeks, but they seem to be picking up a bit more steam. Clay's playing.
Yeah, I'm not concerned at all about the Golden State Warriors. I'm really not. I'm just looking at the Western Conference there now. Sort of, I agree. I would expect Denver at the moment to be the ones like coming through. I know that it's all getting memed about the Lakers for it. And we can jump onto this now. Actually, they started off horrendously, but the last sort of 6-7 games, they've started to look of the Lakers of old. Things are gelling a bit more now. Their shots, they're making their shots, the ones that they were missing, which is, I don't think anyone was realistically expecting after the first sort of 8 games this to be what the Lakers will be like for the rest of the season. They were always going to pick it back up again at some stage. But there are still obviously the concerns that you've got around the Lakers. They have just waived Matt Ryan, which has come as a surprise to a few, as he was one of their one bright sparks in the bad start that they had to the season for shooting. but they have made that spot up in the roster freed for someone, so they will be making some form of move you would expect off of that. Although it would be peak Rob Pelinka to then do that and then be like, I don't want anybody. I'm just going to keep space free.
We love Rob.
Yeah, but I mean, the Lakers are looking sort of back at it now. You'd expect them. I'd still, if you're going to put a gun to my head and say like where they're going to finish, I'm still going to put them in the play-in. But it's sort of what I think everyone was expecting for the Lakers.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your expectations are for like a LeBron team. Basically, I don't think LeBron's the best player in this team anymore, which is my big headline from it. I've been thinking about this last couple months.
I agree. And I mean, that might be a bit reactionary, but I will say, I think one of the main, not issues, obviously, because I'd never call bloody LeBron James an issue, but he has been, when these wins have come through and you start to break down what's happened with the Lakers this season, when LeBron's been playing, they've been performing at a worse rate than when he hasn't been. And that's obviously not me saying he's the issue, because he's not the issue. He's a very good player. He's obviously a fabulous NBA player, but I think they've still got to sort out the balance of him, AD. They've kind of sorted Russ with him taking sixth man, but I think there's still dynamics in that team that have to be sorted out for them to be able to compete even at the lower end of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's lucky we didn't record this a couple of weeks ago, because I'd have been going in heavily on Anthony Davis, because he's not been good he hadn't been good for like a year and a half, really. And I've seen him carry worse teams than this Lakers team to at least a playoff spot or within a contention, not like 3-12 or whatever they started, something ridiculously. And since a couple of weeks ago, he has really picked it up. He's, if he was on a slightly better team, like we were saying, Georgia Defensive Player of the Year pick might have come in a little bit, averaging like 27 points, 13 rebounds. It's just been unbelievable. And we know, I feel like, it's kind of sacrilegious to suggest LeBron isn't the best player in his team, but this was always the plan at some stage to fade like this. When they traded for this guy, he was the future. They brought him in, and eventually you give LeBron less to do, and it eventually becomes AD's team. And obviously that hasn't really come to fruition, mainly due to the fact that AD can't stay on the court. But he always had the talent in him. He was unbelievable for that like sort of last stretch before he put the trade request in at New Orleans. But the injuries and everything probably led people to forget. And he's also had some sort of weird shooting seasons and stuff like that, where it just hasn't been efficient at all. So I'm glad to see him doing better personally. And I think he is the key driver in this. I mean, you can mention all those things, and that's a fair point in all of them. But realistically, end of the day, I think AD is what is winning this team. What's causing them to win some games finally.
Yeah,
I mean, the question of if we're going to go on for the best player, I think if there's the famous thing, if the Martians came down to Earth and you had one game on the line, I'd probably pick LeBron over one game than Anthony Davis. But yeah, when you're looking over the stretch of a season right now, even though AD's got his injury troubles, he's 29. You're looking at LeBron 37. It's going to be AD's team in the relative future for him for this. There's no doubt about that whatsoever, really. But I think the big upturn for the Lakers has been that since Westbrook's moved to that sixth man, all the pressure that was on him about making shots, about just his general game, has dissipated. I know that moves away with when you start playing better anyway, and you start winning games, and you start putting up better numbers, and you're not shooting 8% from free or whatever it was that he had at the start of the year. But it's been quite nice. I know Russell Westbrook is a very dividable character. He is very Marmite in that term. But it's been quite nice to see him play in somewhat of a better manner, and also not just moan at every press conference afterwards, and actually look like he's enjoying basketball again.
Lakers fans are also really brutal, which is another. I mean, it's the biggest NBA fan base of all of them. I'd probably say, and the Knicks can, I guess, kind of compare, but
think the Knicks
they're not good enough.
I think Boston and
that's true.
Lakers.
Bit of bleed green nation.
There's a lot of Boston fans around the world and a lot of Laker fans around the world.
Yeah, those are two premier franchises in the NBA. Really, you would say Golden State kind of getting in there,
your new boys
in the mix.
The newfound money,
the Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
but so yeah, I do think removing the pressure from that situation was really good for him, really beneficial. And I do expect them to trade him at some stage.
Do you still think they're going to do the trade?
Well, it's the only way really with contracts. With the contracts they have, it's the probably the most feasible way of doing it. And I expect them to make those trades because they've got to. I think that's the reason LeBron re-signed, if I'm honest, because they were like, you got to trade these, you got to make this team better, which they still do. We're not like saying that they're in the home stretch here or anything. We're like, yeah, they could get a play in. So if you got LeBron James on your team, no matter what you may think of him at this current stage in his career, the expectation is at least the NBA Finals. It's just how it is.
But I think that LeBron's career in general, that's how it'll always
exactly
be.
So they need to make his team better somehow.
We talk about AD being potentially the best player on this team now. Before LeBron could very easily just turn it on and maybe in a couple months time or a few months time towards the end of the season we'll be saying, don't know what we were on about. LeBron's definitely still the best player. It's just how the team's
all about hindsight
at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you still think
the guy did
All-Star time? Do you think come All-Star time it'll still be Team LeBron? Do you think that's where it'll be?
Yeah. His fan votes on the first set. So yeah, he is the most popular player in the world. So.
It's going to be a very weird year.
Steph may drive him close. Yeah, that's
the thing. It's going to be a very strange year when those two leave the league in general. I know Steph's got a little bit more time, but it'll be very strange when that comes about. But I want to switch up conferences. I want to talk about the East quickly, and not just the East in general, but I do want to talk to you about one team in particular, that being the Chicago Bulls. Do we think it's sort of nearing the time now? Because this is where I know the trade deadline's February and whatnot, but this is where teams will start to sort of thinking like they'll start having plans made for if they are going to make trades and deadlines and blow up or look to acquire someone. Do you think it's time for the Bulls to seriously be looking at blowing this up? Because let's be honest, it's just not really worked. I think Billy Donovan's like 85 and 86 with this whole team since he's been there and everything. And when they first made those acquisitions and they got Zach LaVine in, they had those like nice, not one superstar, but they had like 5 really nice players and pieces there. And it just hasn't really worked for Chicago at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing is that kind of hangs over this team a little bit is obviously Lonzo Ball, isn't there? And he was really, really good when he signed for them last year. Those first couple months, if you remember, he really sort of pushed them off to a very fast start. And last year it was all about them beating teams worse than they couldn't beat anyone who was like a better team than them, basically. So they're beating out the rat teams and they got to the playoffs, which fair enough. I don't really like my tendency when you sort of pose me these questions of these middling teams. You could have said this about the Wizards. You could have said this about a load of teams. I'll be like, yeah, just do it. I don't really see the point in being in a team like this unless you're like the Kings, where you haven't made the playoffs in like 17 years. It's probably longer than that, actually. With the Bulls, they don't really. I mean, the one thing I look at with this Bulls team is the trade they made for Vucevic all that time ago. And you look at what because Wendell Carter's turned into a good piece, and I know the Magic aren't great. And the draft pick they gave up was Franz Wagner, who's a really good NBA player as well. So it's sort of, you're kickstarting, this is your win now mode. And I just don't really like win now teams that are no better than 60, personally. And they could get decent value for DeRozan. Zach LaVine would go. I
think Zach LaVine will be the one that will go for the most.
Yeah, definitely. Because he's younger, he can score with the best of them. If I was the Mavs, I'd be looking at him as a potential partner for.
I think it's more that Zach LaVine signed. So Zach LaVine's there for 4 years.
Yeah.
If you trade for him, you've got no real worries that after a year or two they're just going to go out the door anyway. You had Zach LaVine locked in for a long-term plan.
I also think Zach LaVine seems like he's the one that's the most disgruntled out of all of their stars. So if one of them was going to request a trade or try to move on, I think it would be him.
Yeah, he does strike me as, you're always, whenever you're one of these teams, I mean, you could be looking at the Knicks or someone like that with a lot of cap space, a lot of potential assets, you would say. How highly you value the Knicks assets, I guess your mileage will vary. But you're always looking at the next player who's going to be like, oh, yeah, I want out of here. And we've always thought it might be Bradley Beal, but he just seems really content to lose every single year. So, whatever. But Zach does not strike me as that type of guy. He wants to win. And, some injury issues there as well. So that's something to take into account. But he would fetch you a pretty penny, I would suggest. And I do think DeRozan would as well. He was all NBA last year. You can't really rule that out.
I think, you get to a point though of then if you're gonna let go of Zach LaVine and maybe then you'll also look at letting go of DeRozan. Are you just gonna blow it up fully and just get Lonzo Ball out and get LaVine and get Vucevic out as well? Is that how far do you go?
Yeah, I mean you wouldn't get much of Vucevic. He's absolutely horrific. Lonzo, it's a bit of that's a bit of a tough one because I think a lot of teams would take a punt on Lonzo if he was made available, but that knee situation seems really, really complex, unfortunately for him. It's quite sad. So, the Celtics, I seem to remember, were really interested in Lonzo before he went to the Bulls. So if he became available, cheap price, you would go for it. I think personally, I really rate him quite highly. Yeah, I'd go for a full blow up. I don't see these part bit blow ups, and I mean, I'm not sure if that's the next section because this would be a really good transition if so, because you got these, we were expecting
race for Victor Wembanyama.
You got these Utah Jazz who traded their best two players, you would say, last year, but they've got these different pieces back and they're still winning. I just prefer a full blow up personally. I prefer a full. You get your couple veterans. You try to win a couple games, but not quite to the Houston Rockets stage, which I don't like, where they've got a load of young players who are just. It seems like a terrible culture there, but like a friendly San Antonio Spurs.
What? Just losing nine in a row. The vibes are good. So.
The vibes are great there. That's what I like to see personally.
You want competitive losses whilst trying. That's the main thing. You want competitive losses when you're tanking like this.
It's a weird one to think of though. It's like, how do you do this in a good way? Because you don't you're a Sixers aficionado, obviously. George and I had a couple rough seasons in the woods.
I think rough seasons is describing it lightly, but yeah.
Yeah, and people have complained about how that culture may have affected that team going forward. I don't know how much attention to pay, but it's hard to sort of balance that. We really want to get these high draft picks, and also we don't want to promote losing, basically, and promote negative habits or mindsets. It's a difficult one, I guess.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in terms of in the Rockets dressing room and locker rooms, and the same with the Spurs, just to sort of understand what is being said to the players beforehand. Because I can't imagine the coaching staff are being, no, we don't want to win this game, just chill out, miss these shots. There's no way that that's what's going on. But it's got to be in the back of the minds of the young players, because they're not daft, they're not naive. They know that these franchises are doing this to try and tank and come at the bottom of the NBA to try and get these draft picks. So it's got to be a very, very strange situation for, especially at the team like the Rockets, where you've got loads of rookies and young players that all want to prove themselves in the NBA, but also simultaneously know that they're on a team that don't want to do well and want to tank and finish. It's a very weird juxtaposition as a young player.
Also, as well, looking away from just the young players that are, their contracts are running down and they're really fighting to even potentially keep their place in the league or move to a better destination. They want to prove and show on the court that they can bring value. Totally. And if they're on one of these teams where they're consistently losing, then they might be worried that, I might not show what I can show and I could be out the league.
The issue is with the Rockets, I think, is that they have no veterans. I think
Eric Gordon, mate.
Gordon is the only one there, and he looks like miserable.
Very annoyed. He looks very annoyed.
Yeah, and I think he'll probably get a trade at some stage to somewhere nice. Good for Gordon. But and they also have 5 different players who want about 30 shots each. It's just mental. If you want to get Wembanyama, fair play. This is the best way to do it. And I like a lot of those Rockets players. I like Jalen Green. I I like Porter Jr. as well. Şengün, I think there's a lot of talent there. It's just not melding together very well, and I don't think it promotes. I don't think it's a good thing for the future, particularly. You've seen the Pelicans have had to really sort of go for it for a couple of years now.
When I look at all of these teams sort of that are at the bottom of these conferences, you got the Pistons, you got the Magic, you got Charlotte to an extent, but when LaMelo comes back properly and cements himself in. Also, the Hornets have had about and it's the same with the Heat. The Hornets and the Heat have had 7 available players for the past 3 games now, it seems. They've got
Hayward,
so many injuries. No Hayward, Hayward's always out.
Yeah, he's always
I wouldn't put Charlotte in the mix of the Magic and the Pistons, nor would the same with the Spurs and the Rockets. He would.
Yeah, I don't think they're good.
Regardless of it, if I'm looking at them teams, and I know this is a very weird thing, I think it's destined. It's destiny that he ends up at the Spurs. It just really is. It would be a crime if he ends up in Detroit, I feel. Like Wembanyama ends up in Detroit playing his basketball. I just can't see that happening. I think it would be horrendous for the league. And I think they also know this, and he'll end up in the Spurs. I'll just see how it's happening. Give Pop 1 year at least.
Surely Detroit is a bigger market than San Antonio. I know San Antonio have the heritage. Detroit is a pretty big market. It's a pretty big city.
I know, but let's think in basketball terms. Yeah. Detroit's just known as old diesel engines that they used to make for the Mustangs. That's it. There's nothing else in Detroit. And some crap pizza, isn't that pretty much it?
More the NBA
hard working.
I think it's more the NBA wanting to nurture what could potentially be one of the biggest stars in basketball later. And I think you look at the Spurs franchise and think, yeah, that's a team I'd want to go to for that future.
Yeah, I'd rather him end up on the Pistons than the Rockets.
I don't want to see him at the Rockets. Yeah, completely. I don't want to see him at the Rockets.
You got Cade, Jaden Ivey, Wembanyama. That's pretty nice.
Cade's out for the year already, pretty much, isn't he? Let's be honest.
But he's good though.
We've got Jalen Duren. Yeah, I mean the Pistons have got nice assets. It's just more of the Marvin Bagley III. You know how good vibes he and his family for an NBA team.
He's still got some Marvin Bagley stocks.
Yeah. But I don't know. If I'm looking at Victor Wembanyama, I want to see him at the Spurs. Repping with the English lads. Get Jeremy Sohan. Yeah, come on, let's do it. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see him.
It would be heritage. I gotta say, and it would make. Yeah, it would be a good narrative for the first time they tank since Tim Duncan. Is the first time they get probably a generational superstar. But yeah,
I think all eyes on that one indeed. I mean, that was pretty much it for what I wanted to chat about. I know we haven't really mentioned much about sort of the Celtics and the Cavs and the Bucks. There's not really too much to say. It's Giannis is doing it all again, and Middleton's back pretty soon. I think, what was he? He had a ligament injury in his wrist.
Yeah, it's playoffs, wasn't it?
So, so he's been out for a while, but and he'll come back, and I know they'll ease him back in on a fat minutes restriction for the next 15 games, but. There's not really too much else that I wanted to hash about, and I know we'll speak about this soon again in another week or so. But is there anything in particular that you two wanted to chew the fat on as it is?
I got the Minnesota out, and I've had about 1 billion technical issues over the last 45 minutes, so I'm not going to try my luck and go with anything else.
No, fair enough.
As I mentioned earlier, I was pretty happy we missed the real Nets. I'd say the first couple of weeks were Lakers and Nets frenzy. Obviously, Nets kind of different type, off the court type things, which are
It's still. I still don't think that. There's something else is going to rock up. Like Ben Simmons is now mysteriously. Ben Simmons was then back. Ben Simmons was back for 2 weeks, and now he's injured again. And now I could very easily foresee Ben Simmons not playing anything for a month now.
He's been playing quite well recently, though, don't you think?
He was playing really well, but it's the classic Ben Simmons now, where he's injured, and if he misses 2 weeks, and then you're like, well, do you know what? It's like the 15th of December. Christmas is around the corner. I might have another week off. And then he'll be like, oh, New Year's Eve's around the corner. I'll have another week off. That's what I can see.
Your beloved Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, not much because we don't have any Harden, so it's kind of like the
Clippers. There's no Harden. There's no Maxey. The only thing was, Ripper Shake Milton coming back. Yeah, absolutely lighting up the league for the last 5 games. But I mean, the Sixers have been the Sixers. There's not really too much to report on it.
Not been very exciting. Yeah, I agree.
It's what the Sixers are at the moment. Tobias Harris, he's just chucking along, collected his money, being his complete average stat line. He might get an extra 5 one night, but I don't know. The Sixers, I think they'll try and do something, and it will. The only thing you can talk about the Sixers for is PJ Tucker was definitely going on for how many games in a row can I not score a point? And I think he made like 6 in a row where he didn't score any points.
Pure cardio.
And he was going for that. He was going for that Tony Snell stat line, is what I think he was doing. Like 3 rebound, like that 29 minutes played, 1 rebound or something like that is what he was fully going for. But at the same time, I saw that him and Embiid have got like one of the best defensive duo. I don't know how they measure
PJ Tucker. Yeah, he's a dog. He is a true dog.
Oh yeah, he got that dog in him, is what it is. But that's pretty much it. There's not really too much else to say about the Sixers for it. When I look at the Eastern Conferences, we've missed the Brooklyn drama. The Knicks are the Knicks. The Wizards are the Wizards. And the Hawks are the Hawks. It's not really what a tremendous analysis that is, but that's pretty much what it is.
Cavs are decent. We don't know how decent yet, you would say. I do want to brag about one thing. I do think the Jayson Tatum MVP pick is looking kind of nice at the moment. It
is looking very nice.
I mean, he wouldn't be my necessary pick right now. Maybe.
I think he's definitely in the top 2, top 3. I think him, Steph, and Luka are the ones that you're looking at right now.
Yeah, Luka. Steph has been really. That's another thing about the Warriors.
I think
that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. You'd probably say Donovan Mitchell in a couple of weeks ago, probably tailed off slightly since, and then it's hard doing sort of quarter season MVPs. Yeah. Steph has been really good, hasn't he? That's what frustrates me about the Warriors not being
just
great.
The Warriors. Yeah, it's just the Warriors.
Clay picking it up though again, which was a big issue for them, and then Jordan Poole's not been great. Draymond can't score anymore. So, yeah, I think we've covered a lot, to be honest. Pretty much all the big hitters.
We
probably missed something, but now that I've said that.
When we get back to our regular scheduling now that I'm not as a COVID-crocked man with lungs that are on antibiotics, well, I'm still on antibiotics, but, we move. We'll be back into our schedule pretty soon. But no, we'll leave that there. What I will say is thank you very much for listening. Make sure you're following us on all of our socials at Swingman Pod. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube as well, because we're going to be doing a bit more content on here from this. I myself as well, you might have seen from our Twitter, I've caught a so rare NBA bug. So I'll be making some content in and around that. Make sure you follow us on all of that. Thank you very much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one. Peace.